Okay, it's time to commit. 2024 is the year for prioritizing yourself. Begin your new smile journey with Byte, and you could start seeing results in just 2 to 3 weeks. Just order your at-home impression kit today for only $14.95 at Byte.com. Byte clear liners are doctor-directed and delivered to your door. Treatment costs thousands less than braces, plus they offer financing options, accept eligible insurance, and you could pay with your HSA, FSA. Get 80% off your impression kit when you use code WONDERY at Byte.com. That's BYTE.com. Start your confidence journey today with Byte.
Acast powers the world's best podcasts. Here's a show that we recommend.
What is The Briefing Room? It's a behind-the-scenes look at how the criminal justice system works and the lives of the people within that system.
If you love true crime, well, these are the real people who do the job every day of making sure justice is served.
Hi, I'm Detective Dave.
I'm Detective Dan. Together, we have decades of experience in local law enforcement, a profession that we think is often misunderstood.
So we're going to explore how to do it right, and we won't shy away from when it's done wrong. These are stories you'll hear nowhere else. Unique, frank, and unvarnished.
From the team that brought you Small Town Dicks, this is The Briefing Room. Episode 1 drops on August 30th.
We'll meet you in the briefing room.
Acast helps creators launch, grow, and monetize their podcasts everywhere. Acast.com.
And welcome back to Scarred for Life, the podcast where we open up old wounds by looking back at the films that scared us as kids. I'm Terry.
And I'm Mary Beth.
In each episode, our special guest or guests bring with them a movie that traumatized them as a child or television show.
This week, our guests are Justin Benson and Aaron Moorhead. They burst on the scene in 2013 with their festival hit Resolution, and since then have become known for writing and directing challenging but really smart genre films. They also produced challenging genre films like last year's She Dies Tomorrow, which was one of our top movies of the year. And their latest film, Synchronic, is currently available on VOD and is coming to Blu-ray very soon. Welcome to the show, guys. This is so exciting.
It is. Thank you for having us. We're quarantined together, and this will probably be the funnest thing we do right now.
Well, you know, it's so weird because before we get into the interview, we just kind of wanted to say congratulations because the news just broke 2 days before we're recording that you guys are going to be directing some episodes for Marvel.
It's cool.
It's like casual, whatever. That's so cool. Congratulations.
Thank you. Thank you very, very much.
Have they already sent the sharpshooters out to like police for spoilers?
Yes.
I figured.
Actually, I don't know if you're recording video, but there's 2 red dots on our.
I kind of wondered because like I know how tight-lipped they are, but anyway, congratulations. That's amazing. We can't wait for the world to see what genre fans already know. But before we kind of dive into the now, let's take it back. How did both of you get into horror or genre?
Oh man. You're gonna get really fresh answers out of us because, like, do you want to go first? I'll give it a shot. Yeah, I know that my love for, I would say almost exclusively horror sci-fi. I mean, where this comes from. I have a love for specifically horror, specifically sci-fi, and the combination of the two. But my dad loved horror sci-fi. And,
okay.
And so that would be, he would feed me a stream of books and a lot of TV with that. You know, it was a pretty, what would you say? How would you describe my household? Kind of Leave It to Beavery kind of household. So like I wasn't given Alien when I was 9 years old. You know what I mean? Like Jurassic Park. Oh, sorry. And I'm a kid of the 90s. I was born in 87. So just so you know, kind of like what was being given to me. And so like Jurassic Park, when it came out, like that was like way too scary for me. It was like years later that I was allowed to. But we watched like every single sci-fi and horror show that came on TV to the point that I didn't even recognize a difference between the genres. Like I I didn't know that Stephen King was a horror writer. He was just the guy that I read all the time. I didn't know that. I wouldn't, like, it actually was almost 15 years later that somebody called him a horror writer. It was like, oh, I kind of thought he had his own genre in a way. It's just Stephen King books, you know? I didn't even know that I was reading horror books growing up nonstop. I was just reading Stephen King books, Dean Koontz and that kind of stuff. But it was, you know, every night, but especially every Friday night, it was whatever, like, one season version of a TV show, like Millennium or you know, Space, whatever kind of thing that was on that night. And then, you know, religiously the X-Files, of course, as with probably everyone listening to this. And Outer Limits, the new one, and Twilight Zone, the old one, specifically, because there's an original Outer Limits that for whatever reason we turned our nose up to, but the remake was good. And the original Twilight Zone was the glory, but the remake of Twilight Zone before Justin and I got to direct the remake of the third of the Twilight Zone, maybe fourth. So yeah, it was a steady stream of sci-fi work.
Cool. What was your favorite Stephen King book growing up?
Luckily, my parents did let me read the entire Dark Tower series, where I was old enough to process things like sexuality and gore and stuff. And so I was reading that actually pretty much as it came out. Not as it came out. I mean, obviously, but before I was born is when I started writing. But there was that large gap of time between Wizard and Glass and Wolves of the Cala. But between then, he got hit by the van and his whole life. Writing style changed. And so I would say Wizard and Glass was that. Although, Needful Things was a pretty big one for me too.
Needful Things is so good. I keep wanting someone to take that and do like another adaptation of it, like the way they've been doing The Outsider and stuff. I really want to see that come to life, because that is one of my favorites of his books too.
You know, and I'm sorry, Justin, I'm kind of taking it for a bit here, but that there's also one thing that I would definitely be interested in approaching an adaptation of, but it's actually Dean Koontz book. Which is called Watchers. And it's got a serial killer in it that genuinely gets kind of like supercharged by his kills. Like he steals their life energy, but it might be in his head and it might be real. He just kind of like gets this kind of vitality out of it. But most importantly, it has a talking dog, or a super smart dog. A super smart dog. It does not talk. And also an abomination, I believe, called the Outsider, if I remember that correctly, that came from the same lab as the super smart dog. And I just absolutely love that story. And I've read that book probably 5 times. So
I kind of remember that one a little bit. I was a big Dean Koontz, Stephen King fan, and was like tearing through all of his books. And I think I have seen that. I think I've read that one.
Yeah. I have no idea if it like holds up, I guess I should say. I mean, I read it 5 times between the age of probably 8 and 15. So
the cover is just some woods and a golden retriever. So yes, I 100% will read this book.
What about you, Justin? What was your introduction to genre films?
It's kind of in my memory, it's this muddy convergence of like several different things. One of them is that my parents, my mother and father, they had a child when they were very young. My older brother, who's I think he's about 11 years older than I am. And it was the 60s, and she went away to Home for Unwed Mothers, had to go for adoption, no contact, but he contacted us when he was 18 years old. And I was 7. And he came to our house and met with us. And I remember that they really hit it off. Like, and he's like, I want to go to college in San Diego where we lived, could I come stay with you guys? So all of a sudden I had my actual full 100% blood brother living with us, 18, but I never met him before. And he came with a whole bunch of Stephen King books. so Stephen King again. And I would just like read all those Stephen King books, and he would rent horror movies for us to watch. I remember he rented Evil Dead 2. And I didn't understand at 7 years old that was like more of like an action adventure comedy. When you're like 7, that shit's terrifying.
Yeah.
It's terrifying. But then you watch it as an adult and you're like, this is like one of the funniest things I've ever seen in the best way. It's like one of those, it's great cinema, but it is also just like, this is hilarious. This is Three Stooges, but so there was that, and then there was. I had a next door neighbor who was like, you ever heard of like Nightmare on Elm Street? I'm like, no. He's like, oh my god, I got to tell you about it. And he's talking about Freddy Krueger and how it works. And he's like, you got to see Part 3, The Dream Warriors. And he's like, you got to go to. It was like at 7-Eleven to rent. So I like go up the street and rent Nightmare on Elm Street Part 3. And got like way into. When you're a kid, that movie, you get so not that an adult can't. When you're a child, you're just like way into it. You're gonna get together with your friends and be a wizard and beat up Krueger. Like it's like super fun.
In my head, by the way, this kid that you're talking to is wearing like a leather jacket and smoking like clove cigarettes. Come on, kid. He's got like a toothpick, you know.
Like a gold tooth, maybe. Just like, hey.
And then I remember after that, I think it was like my late teen years. I read in like Entertainment Weekly that one of the scariest movies of all time is this movie called The Texas Chainsaw Massacre. Oh. Like, wasn't as, I don't know. It's one of those things where it's like, you don't necessarily like just catch that on syndication, mm-hmm. you know, whatever. So I was like 17 years old. I sought it out or I ordered the DVD online or whatever. And I remember like seeing that and thinking like, oh, like creating something like that would be sort of gratifying. And also like when you watch it, you're like, I can kind of see how one could do that versus other movies that frighten you. It's like, it's not like hugely technically challenging. It's an amazing piece of cinema, but you can look at it and be like, oh, maybe there's a possibility I could do it. Oh, the only other thing I can think of is before I met my brother, USA Network every night, or not every night, like Friday, Saturday nights at midnight, they'd have Elvira, Mistress of the Dark, hosting like double features of like the movies that do go into syndication or not syndication. I don't know what you call it, but the movies that do end up on TV very quickly, like Friday the 13th Part 5 with the Toxic Avenger after that. So like, I remember that stuff, but not being like inspired. I just have like a nostalgia for that. And anytime I see like the image of Elvira, I think about being like 6 years old and laying in bed watching her host from the USA Network.
Yeah. I don't know. I actually just remembered because there's this weird compartmentalization that I had of as I was trying to describe it. I'm not doing very well with my words, but like there were these things that are clearly horror that were not in my head horror. They were just their own genre, like Jurassic Park. That's or Jaws, like creature movies, straight up like creature features. But because it was like a big budget movie by Spielberg, it was like this other thing in my head. And I do remember I had a cousin who's or have a cousin. Oh my gosh, my cousin Adam, and he lived in Tallahassee. And so when we'd go and visit in Tallahassee, me and him and his sister would just get into so much trouble. And we rent. He was a little bit older, but you know when you're 9, a 12-year-old is like 35 years old. Yeah. It's like a wise. They're wise
with a giant beard on the mountain.
Like in the same way that he's just like, have you ever heard of Nightmare on Elm? Like I got that for Dead Alive, like these very transgressive.
Oh wow.
Yeah, isn't that where someone like takes a lawnmower and paints?
Oh yeah, lawnmower over all the zombies at the end, and the mom eats the dog. Yeah,
got that for Evil Dead. And then there was one more that it's just on the tip of my tongue, but I'm not going to remember it. But yeah, I do remember like I had a transgressive cousin. He was my cool introduction to that. So thank you, Adam. I appreciate you very much.
Yeah. Well, what I've kind of picked out from what you guys are talking about, it almost seems like this might be kind of where, because you're one of the things that I appreciate about your movies is that they don't tend to just stick to one genre. They sort of like are playful with different genre conventions, and the movies you're talking about do the same thing. So I'm just curious, do you think that your childhood might have like infected how you view genre as an adult?
Man, that's a good question.
I know that, I mean, one way to think about it is like there's a lot of beats in, for example, Resolution, where it's like you understand why we're not doing certain things if you've seen something else. Like a good example would be like, this is very basic, and there was never a version of the movie where it was like about demons specifically, but it's hard to watch Resolution if you've seen Evil Dead and not see like Not realize that you're being given the expectation that that's going to happen.
Yeah.
That thing from this other movie, you know. And I think there's a lot of things in Resolution like that. Spring, it's even more conspicuous. Spring is just like, oh yeah, it seems like it's going to be a vampire movie or a werewolf movie, or that's it. That's all it was. Wait, no, there's other.
Actually, by the way, I just saw today a scene from The Howling 2, and there's a werewolf threesome. Have you seen this?
I have not. I'm not familiar with too many. I've seen the first Howling, but that is like where my knowledge of
they're fully nude, but covered in fur. But the fur doesn't cover the nudity.
Well, of course not.
Disgusting and awesome. But anyway, I just realized because of the blend of sexuality and werewolves. Spring, I've never seen The Howling 2. And actually, it's kind of funny how often, especially for the first two movies, we stumbled into tropes that we didn't know existed. Or I didn't, at least. Where I was kind of unaware of a few of them. There was a piece in my mind that knew that we were playing with something, but it wasn't this like, oh yeah, I've seen 10 of these movies. We're going to toy with this. It was more like, yeah, I know that there's like an episode of The Twilight Zone with like a guy with a devil with the briefcase or something like that. And it was like in a conversation, like a sentence or two, we'd talk about that, but it wasn't like the whole scene. It wasn't like the whole point of it, you know?
The only other, show, movie, anything that I can think of that deals with the though buried, like basically the main premise of Resolution. This idea, again, fundamentally Resolution is about there's an entity watching these two guys, and it is transmitting its observations to various mediums, whether it be photographs. You get some indication it used to be cave paintings before there was hard drives and celluloid and all that. The only other, that's called thoughtography. Well, it's called a lot of things, but one of the things you would call it is thoughtography, which I think is a term coined by Nikola Tesla, because of a machine he was trying to make that would do that. The only other place I've ever seen that explored is the X-Files.
Yeah.
So there is a weird, our Resolution, there is like one little thing in there that is, it is directly, I was not aware of that episode when I wrote that script, but I've been aware of it since, and it's interesting just to see that's like, oh, that is the one place where that turns up. Yeah. Unless you guys know others. Huh. Maybe I'm wrong. It's like, dude, there's like 20 of those.
No, I can't think of any.
There's 20 that came out this year. No.
What's funny is I literally don't remember if we're talking about it yet or not, so I'll have to be a little vague. But our new indie project that we had, we were already through the first draft. While Justin was tweaking something on the first draft, I happened to read an H.P. Lovecraft story that had it used the same mechanic, and we decided, like, you know what, let's just take the name because it's the perfect name, and it's like a complete reimagining of that story with the same mechanic in it, even though we had not read it in forever or maybe ever.
Which one? I know, you don't have to tell me. I'm just like, I love H.P. Lovecraft, so I'm like, which one? That's very exciting.
That was actually the second to last one because we just.
Oh, you're right, second to last. Oh my god!
So I got so confused for a second.
Yeah.
We very quick. We made a movie a few months ago.
Yeah, that's what I had to talk about. We made a movie in our apartment a few months ago. So.
Oh,
I thought it was
cool.
You guys just can't like not rest. It seems like.
Yeah, I was gonna say, aren't you tired?
It's weird because like sometimes you feel like you're gonna fall into this thing as a filmmaker that you're just gonna be always waiting for someone to give you money or permission to go make a project or whatever it is. So you like push yourself. You're like, you got all this time, you got to do it, and then you do it, and then you get overemployed. And then you're like, why do we do this? This is so hard. We're not gonna sleep for 3 years. This is gonna
Yeah. I feel like one of us should also just like have a baby or some like other impossible thing to make sure that this year is the wildest year we can possibly have.
I'm gonna have to get one online.
Yeah. Anyone who's listening, I'll just send you Justin's address. Not even a baby to show.
I just want to mail a baby.
Mail him a baby. Casual.
I mean, that's like a movie potential right there, right? I mean,
this is a horror movie. 3 minutes. I made a little 15-second short film, like right when The Witch was coming out, where it's me doing the peekaboo thing, but there's nothing there. And then I do peekaboo and a baby appears.
Oh, God.
I get terrified and run away. Because that's a nightmare.
That sounds pretty horrific.
It sounds like my worst fucking nightmare. So anyway, as an adult, speaking of The Witch and making short films, what draws both of you to horror now that you're filmmakers?
I mean, there's a lot of things, but one of them is there's not a whole lot of places in your adult life as all the mysteries of everything kind of get revealed to you, more or less. It's not a lot of places where you get to go like have the fun like roller coaster ride. Like if you were just to find it and be able to transmit it to your TV set in your home, you could have this amazing roller coaster ride of actually feeling frightened by something. It's a really special experience when you can get to have it. It's like rare. It's very rare. In fact, there's probably like one movie every 2 or 3 years that do that. Not to say all horror has to be scary, has to be frightening or that type of thing, because it's really fun watching Tucker and Dale versus Evil or something like that. But that's one of the things. It's like, it can be really fun and really invigorating, like a roller coaster when you can actually work out a way to frighten people.
And kind of tying on to that, something you said at the very beginning is, if you're making a movie that explores the big questions, that's a good thing to do. And if you do it under the guise of like a drama, you either win an Oscar or you are a foreign film or you make the most boring movie in the world, right? Like that's it. Like you can't fail, because otherwise you're a pretentious jerk or you know what I mean? Or you've just boring or whatever. The other way you can do that is within the genre space, sci-fi and horror and fantasy and all of that, where you can talk about these ideas that we all dream about every single night, and during our waking hours, and ideas of purpose and ideas of beginnings and endings and death and love and life. And it's nice to be able to explore that in a form of entertainment that everybody can watch. And it's not just like in another world, it's just a black and white movie where you slowly zoom in on a crying child's face at a railroad yard, So it feels nice to be able to talk about things that you want to talk about with the extra padding of it being accessible, and you don't feel like you're as someone who is not a philosopher, you don't feel like I'm putting on a top hat and pretending.
Right.
Cool.
With that metaphor, all philosophers wear top hats. So yeah.
I mean, I think it comes with the job.
Mm-hmm.
You're assigned one when you become a philosopher. But so this next question, Justin, you were talking about how like certain movies come along every once in a while that are really scary. So do you remember what the last movie that scared either of you? Like remember when you were a kid getting that kind of terrified of it?
I've been terrified as an adult recently.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, I gave that ride. Off the top of my head, over the last several years, it's been Hereditary, and my relationship with Hereditary was that like I think when that movie came out, we were out. I think it was The Endless. We were one of the movies was like out doing the film festival circuit. We were following it around, and I only like weirdly like I knew it was good, but then you hear a lot of backlash, like why this isn't scary, like what's this? And so I was expecting like this would be good, and I like put it on by myself in my apartment, and I just be like, this is the most terrifying thing I've ever seen. I thought it'd be like end up being super minimalist and what you don't see. And nope, there's mom sawing her own head off, and it's all but that's not the reason why it's frightening. It's one of those movies where it's just like, oh, it's got all that worked out. I'm not going to say another one because Aaron, I'm afraid I'm going to take what's in Aaron's head.
Oh, I had a pretty good one that was like, we don't often talk about this because there's a lot that, I've got a good one. Because the easy ones that are also true is like, The Witch, like Mungo, things like that. But you know what actually just like shook me to my core, and I hope that this counts in your question, is Paul Schrader's First Reformed. That movie shook me up and really wrecked me for quite a while. And it's an existential kind of horror, even though I would not obviously that is not the kind of movie that you put on the horror shelves per se, but this kind of like existential horror. And one of the problems is that it's true. It's got an existential climate change anxiety behind it. And it's tough because no matter what, at the end of the day, these supernatural horrors are, for the most part, a fiction. And I say that not discounting the potential ramifications of an afterlife and religion and all of that. But like, what Ethan Hawke's character goes through in First Reformed is real. It's completely real, and it can happen to anyone. And that's really rough. Outside the whole like strapping yourself with a bomb and barbed wire. But yeah.
I think the other one that we talk about a lot that's also very real because we've been through it exactly is Kill List by Ben Wheatley.
Oh,
like we've been in that situation exactly. Like we were both hitmen. That's how we met. And like we're on this one mission, and like we're like, hey, I feel like there's something bigger behind all this. And
I actually thought you were going to say Wake and Fright.
Oh, well,
because we have been in that situation where just like in a small town and everyone's just drinking nonstop, and you'd feel rude if you stop, and beer becomes again like this cosmic god that's trying to ruin you.
Very relatable content, Hitman and
very relatable
existential dread right there.
That's such a good specific movie to say that's like based on your life. Just to kill it, like it's just two guys killing for money.
Kill List is a very frightening film. When we didn't know that movie, we weren't cool at all. We didn't know that movie existed, and when we were following our first movie resolution around different film festivals, I think someone, Ted Guggenheim, handed it to us and said, it was like that scene Almost Famous where like the older sister hands her little brother records, like someday you'll be cool. And that was like, I don't like how Ted handed us a copy of Kill List.
Actually, it was, I'm just gonna modify this because there's a little more to the story. So we got it actually in this film festival in Sheffield. And they insisted on actually giving us copies of it, even though they were just fans. Like, they were just like, you have to have this. And I told them, we both told them, like, this is a Region 2 DVD. We cannot possibly play this. And they're still like, have it. It's yours. And so I own Kill List, but I had no way to watch it. And then so years passed. And then Ted eventually was like, you have to watch Kill List. I'm like, fine. So we bought it on Amazon. And that's how we did it.
That's amazing. Yeah, I was never cool enough to have seen that movie either, and it wasn't until I think like 2018 maybe that I saw it. But man, it's a good one.
Yeah,
it is a good one.
I watched that with my dad, when it came out, and my dad's like, "That was really stupid. I don't understand anything that happened." So I was like, "I don't know either." And then I rewatched it, and I was like, "A man has never been so wrong in his entire life to say that this movie was bad." I have no idea where you're coming from, but kind of going into, your creative endeavors, can you just, for anyone who hasn't seen Synchronic yet, can you just give them a little bit of an explanation about what the film was about?
Yep, Aaron's going to do that.
I got to put on my Xbox t-shirt. Okay, I think this is only audio, but let's do it. Okay, so I think you can see us. We're on Zoom. So, Synchronic is about two best friends who are paramedics in New Orleans. They've been best friends forever, played by Anthony Mackie and Jamie Dornan. And they start encountering this odd series of first responder scenes. They seem kind of impossible. Someone seems stabbed, but there's no stabbed to death, but not with like a knife, but like a sword. Somebody seems to have fallen down an elevator shaft, but it seems like he's fallen way further than the length of the elevator shaft, or somebody's bitten by a snake that is not native to the area. A whole bunch of kind of impossible things. And, they're not detectives. It's not their job to figure this out, but that's what's happening. But they're all connected by this wrapper for a over-the-counter synthetic designer drug called Synchronic. And all of these rappers. So when I say rapper, I mean like something that it is wrapped in. So not a person who is a rapper.
Right. It is a sick rap name.
Yeah. So they find these rappers on the ground in every one of these, meaning every one of these people took Synchronic, and Synchronic has these very bizarre effects that to say a lot more as a spoiler, and I don't know if we're doing spoilers. So
Whatever you guys feel comfortable doing.
We'll be light. Maybe we'll be light on spoilers since this is coming out right when the movie comes out, and we don't want to spoil it for anyone before.
That's smart.
They watch it.
Smart. Yeah. We can talk around it. We're pretty good with that. So,
I mean, I feel like you kind of have to with your films. Like, you know, you always have to, like, if you're doing press for your particular films, you kind of have to talk around some of the spoilers because they're always so twisty. Oh, I love the shirt.
Oh my God. Wait, is that from, what's his name? There's like where did you get it? Because there's a guy I know who has a shirt like that on his site, and I wonder if it's the same site.
Oh, is that Last Exit to Nowhere? I don't know if that's what yours is.
It's you're right. What is the name of that? I feel terrible because I have two of his shirts.
I know. I have two of his shirts. Yeah.
Yeah, I have his X-Files one too, with that looks like a Black Flag shirt, but it's X-Files shirt.
Wait, Black Lodge.
I'm sorry. It's a Twin Peaks. Yes.
Yeah.
Twin Peaks.
Yeah. By the way, oh my God, I saw the greatest tweet the other day. It was the best thing about David Lynch films is that there's no possible way to spoil them.
That's a fair point.
Yeah.
It's true though.
So I'm curious what your guys' thought process is when you go into designing a film, because it seems like we talked a little bit earlier about how you guys sort of play in different genres. Do you set out like, I want to tell a time travel story, or I want to tell this story, or I want to tell a story about romancing a monster? Or how does that come about, especially with in regards to synchronic? How does the story kind of evolve?
Gosh, it's usually this sort of sci-fi horror premise comes first, and then like the character and the themes quickly come after, because that's the reason why you got excited about the premise, was because it somehow you just knew immediately that it's like the seed to talking about all this other stuff you want to talk about. Again, whether that's themes or character or the emotional stuff involved. Synchronic specifically started with the idea that what if there were a substance that put you into an altered state that allowed you to see time as Einstein described it, as there being no distinction between past, present, or future, sort of block state universe theory. And then quickly everything else came out from that, because it was like, oh, then you could tell a time travel story where thematically it could be about not romanticizing the past, which usually time travel stories are about, like, you get back there and all of a sudden everything's like literally beautiful.
Right.
So that was that. And then like, trying to think of like specific instances in other stories. I think The Endless started with, well, we already knew those characters. We knew those characters were in a cult, and we knew we wanted to tell a story about rejecting conformity and all that type of thing. So that was that happened really fast. Spring was started with the premise that I won't gives away too much to say what the character Louise is in Spring, but that premise came, and then the story that grew out of it, we just realized like this whole thing is about rebirth, whether it's the rebirth of someone who is going through something tough in their life and they need to be reborn in a particular way, or it's literally, and I'm not going to say too much, but
right.
And then Resolution it started with the premise that we didn't steal from the X-Files, but could have, of thoughtography. I know we've done. Well, that's probably it. That's probably all we can say out loud.
Yeah. Oh, there's one that we took from. Oh my God, that's so funny. We did a short film called Wrecked that was a play on Twilight Zone ideas. You know, it's got this amazing actor named Kasim. I cannot pronounce his last name. G. He goes by Kasim G. I don't know if you can pronounce his last name, but where he's a fighter pilot that got wrecked in the desert, which sounds like I don't know, 4 or 5 Twilight Zone episodes, whether or not they are. And I hope somebody gets to watch this, because it's on YouTube and it's only like 12 minutes long. But that was one where I think we were just asked, like, hey, do you guys have any Twilight Zone-y stories?
So you said that one's on YouTube?
Yeah.
We'll find it and put links to it in the show notes then.
We did a segment for VHS Viral called Bone Storm. And,
yes, you did.
Yeah,
yes, you did.
But see, that one was unique because that one was like, we got to come up with something found footage. And it was like, okay. And they're like, we want it to be like kinetic. We're like, okay, skate videos. Kids make skate videos. Mm-hmm. And then the next thought was, it was like, it should be Tony Hawk skateboarding meets Mortal Kombat. And then it doesn't go much deeper than that.
But that's kind of what it is. It's kind of a story about friendship, but really watching is 12 minutes of that.
That's amazing.
So one thing that I know that Terry and I really love about your films is the way they address friendship, particularly between friendships between men. And it is so refreshing to see that on screen. And so what has it been like to kind of work together and create these really awesome like male bonds on screen that we almost never see?
It's funny. I mean, I'll actually just address a little piece of your question and then go into it. But it is almost literally business god coincidence that it's been male friendships. We have so many projects that explore romances, marriages, relationships between women. We have so many, and it just happens to be, Resolution was what it was. Spring is a heterosexual.
Yeah.
Right.
The Endless, it was just because we knew it had to be the two of us because of just the way the movie was being made, and we happen to be two men. Mm-hmm. And so it's like, it's just this thing that's like, it is not it's not a deliberate focus. The relationship,
okay.
But the deconstruction of the masculine relationship is not. That's just like the way the winds blow. And we have probably twice as many projects that just are harder to get made for one reason or another, but not for the relationship aspect, that are not masculine focused.
We just made a movie a few months ago where no one is friends ever. And it's like part of the premise of the movie.
It's a friendship opportunity. Yeah.
We also, it was interesting. We worked on a feature film about a real historical figure named Aleister Crowley.
Oh boy, Aleister Crowley.
And that was that. When I look back on that project, we had developed it as a movie and then a TV show. But the movie version, especially, it was so much about like it was sort of a condemnation of like he was such the opposite of like giving a kind treatment to the types of characters and films we've done in our past. And I haven't opened that script up since like 2016, I don't think. But I was just thinking about it, it's so wildly the opposite of everything we've ever done that it would have been cool.
Yeah. But going to your question about the relationship side of it, it is a conscious choice in many ways. I'm actually going to give you a super pragmatic thing. Is that a lot of the reasons that our movies are about a relationship between specifically two people and no more and no less is a math problem. You need to get your audience and to care about your characters and know them deeply. And you have 90 minutes to 2 hours to do so. And we believe that it takes all of that time to do so. If you subtract a character, then you have to have people talking to themselves or a whole bunch of ensemble characters that pop in and out of their lives, which as independent filmmakers is very expensive.
Yeah.
And if you introduce new dynamics, you now have to get to know 3 people and you have even less screen time to fully understand them all. You have 4 people. And then again, going back to the math problem now becomes a money problem where you're making an independent film. And now anytime that you have a scene with 3 people in it, you owe 1 more shot every single day. Every single scene, 1 more shot that you didn't have time for before. And then you have 4 people, you owe 2 more shots. 5 people, you owe 3 more shots. And so it's funny where it's like, this is not just a budget problem, but it's just one of those things like, we're not even going to set out to make an ensemble in 90 minutes because everyone will just have to end up as some kind of an archetype at that point. They just have to, because you don't have enough time to really know who they really are. And so you either make a little gamble with your audience and say like, okay, this guy's wearing the Letterman jacket. You already know everything about him. He's the jock. You kind of already know what he's going to do. So you can do that where it's like, all right, the audience knows him so he can just get through that and get to the plot and whatever. Or you can make your whole movie about getting to know these 2 people and get into the nuances of it and hopefully succeed at like making you care about them and understand them in a way that exceeds archetype.
That makes sense.
I did have another question, particularly about Synchronic, because I mean, you have like stars of like Jamie and Anthony on the program. How different was it working with them, Vice, working more with like the indie thing where it's more a little bit maybe self-controlled in terms of who you're casting and working with? What was it like working with, Jamie and Anthony?
We always say we got really lucky in that, you know, if they wanted to make our lives terrible, totally could have. You know, if one of if one of them walked away, we have that means everything falls apart, and you're in this partnership. And they were just always super, super kind to us. And that was amazing. You always kind of hear horror stories about someone making their first kind of bigger budget thing and dealing with the dynamics of dealing with stars and stuff like that. That wasn't the case. It was totally easy. The biggest, like, most noticeable difference was just that on all of our other movies, we always had like weeks of rehearsal going into it. And they're really, really busy guys. So there's no way you're going to get that. And that doesn't mean what you ultimately have is it's neither better nor worse, but it's different than what you usually do, because usually when you're rehearsing with them, you're constantly changing the dialogue in the script to sort of tailor it to that person. So that was the first time we didn't do that, and it just makes it different. Yeah. It's definitely like a different thing. But that was also like, realistically, that is most movies. That is what you're going to do. Like if it's not an independent film where you're, you know, mostly making it with you and friends, I think. I mean, if someone's getting like a month of rehearsal,
but it's also, it's a fun contrast also, because between these two movies, between Synchronic, before Synchronic was The Endless and after Synchronic is this new thing, both of them just starring us. And the absolute benefit of that is we just rehearsed ourselves to death. And it was great, you know. And by the way, like, Synchronic doesn't suffer for it. It's just a whole new dynamic. You know, it's a new thing about like figuring out these little moments right there and then. And also these guys are pros and we're just a bunch of clowns. So like they understand what the camera needs. They understand what the story needs, you know, very quickly. So
that's awesome. Okay, so we've talked about your childhoods, talked about Synchronic. So, but Justin and Aaron, what movie/show are we talking about today?
We're talking about an episode of The X-Files called Home.
Oof, yes, we are.
Probably,
oh boy.
Is it the most controversial episode of The X-Files?
It is.
I think it is. So for those of you who haven't seen it, it's season 4, episode 2 of The X-Files. The remains of a murdered, deformed infant lead agents Scully and Mulder to a family of murderous, inbred, animal-like brothers living on a secluded farm in a remote section of Pennsylvania.
Wow.
We're actually living right now, kind of near where it takes place.
Really?
Road trip.
Yeah, we're in Pittsburgh. So, yeah.
I smell road trip potential right there. You should go there and make a sequel to it. I'm curious where the Peacock family has gotten to over the years.
Well, they shot all of the X-Files in Vancouver, I believe. I know it's. Yeah. So they doubled. I don't know how you can possibly double rural Pennsylvania for Canada. They did it.
I don't know.
Yeah.
But okay, so how old were each of you when you saw this for the first time? Like, what happened? Like, tell us your horror story with this episode of X-Files.
I'll be a little transparent here. I for sure saw this episode when it aired, because that was as I mentioned earlier, my ritual with my dad. We would do rituals. The ritual was watching X-Files. So I for sure saw it. I cannot actually remember it then. I've rewatched it recently because there's a lot of chatter around this episode recently, and realized what it is. So I would say my relationship with it as something that scarred me is kind of weirdly retroactive, where I look back on it as like, oh, okay, that was an exposure to something really gnarly, really early, for sure, and it's somehow filtered into the work I'm somehow.
What about you, Justin?
I think I was about 12, and I remember, but I don't. Here's the thing: I don't know if I fully understood what was going on in that family dynamic. I think I just felt really gross afterward, but like didn't quite It's weird. It's like, it's not said out loud. You know, but I'll make some other funny observations. Watching it as a child, you know, you're disturbed by it. I remember being really frightened by the car driving up the street playing that song, the music.
Oh, yes.
The old Chevy, that song playing to the house. Because before I saw that episode, when I was a little kid, I had these nightmares of the sound of hooves coming up the street, and it was a horse-drawn hearse pulling up at my house, and this person would get out of the hearse and stare at my window, and it was like they were coming to collect people. It was the weirdest like dream to have as a child. But that car registered the fact that like when you hear that car coming and you hear that music, that means
wonderful.
Yeah, and it's almost like the Grim Reaper.
Oh my God!
Wow.
Oh my God.
That's like, I find that to be like I don't know. There's like something like primal isn't the right word, but it's something like that. It's like you're like born with that art in your head or something.
I think because of that, there's this whole episode, you know, on its surface, obviously, it's just like, oh yeah, a grisly, you know, incestuous, you know, Hills Has Eyes kind of tale.
Yeah.
But there's also a really big examination, I guess to use a bigger word for it, is deconstruction of, you know, lost American innocence in Americana. And I think that car specifically and that song specifically like harkens to the 50s as like this wonderful, wonderful thing. And then of course it's carrying a bunch of hillbillies that are going to murder you, which is also ties into synchronic.
It also, I mean, it's weird because this is not to, I mean, the societal issues and political issues we say aren't that different from the 1980s, even like not that different. This episode of TV from what year is it? It's from
96.
96.
In the mid 90s. There's lots of ways to interpret it. To look at it politically or, you know, socially. And that's really interesting. And it's actually like really relevant today in the sense that like, I don't know, are Mulder and Scully are being a little uppity towards that family, and like should the family be left alone? But what they're doing is really horrific, and they are once they hit the hornet's nest, it like they are pretty fucking gnarly.
Yeah, but also like they took real care to, by the end of the episode, make sure that we're all a little tiny bit conflicted about at least like the mother's role and everything. And that's, by the way, I assume we're spoiling it. Do we want to
we're just talk about everything. We're going to dig into themes. Yeah. We're going to dig into all that shit. Yeah.
Also, like, let's talk about how like Mulder and Scully, when people get killed in that episode, they're just like, okay, but I got this plan with the pigs, you know, and it's just like, someone just died.
Oh my God. Oh yeah. We talked about this. So there's a scene that this is what I want to focus the whole episode around this. And by the way, full props to, I'm going to back up. I'm going to talk for a little bit here. Sorry. But back up is, so this was co-written by Glenn Morgan, who is one of the main writers on the X-Files. And also, by the way, a very close friend of ours because he wrote our Twilight Zone episode.
Yes, he did.
And actually I texted him just before doing this and I said, hey, we're doing a whole episode about home. And he goes, don't you have better things to be doing with your time? And I said, you should join us. And he says, there's football.
Priorities, man. I got it.
But anyways, there's this scene that is like downright hilarious.
It really is.
I did not remember where. So, Mulder and Scully are going to go and take down the hillbillies with the deputy who is very upset that his, I think, police chief has been killed.
Yeah, the sheriff is killed.
And the deputy goes in and sets off a trap and gets his head cut off by an axe that is like on a wire when he opens the door. And no joke, Scully sees this, runs, kind of power walks over to Mulder, and then goes, Deputy so-and-so just got beheaded. And Mulder's looking through binoculars and just goes, yes, Scully, they're exhibiting pack tactics. And just something like that. And it's like, wait, you're not going to talk about the dead guy at all? And no, he's just like, and then it cuts to a scene of him like doing some kind of caper with a bunch of pigs.
Yep.
And they're just giggling about it and cracking jokes. And like,
she talks about Babe, about watching Babe.
I don't remember the X-Files having no regard for human life whatsoever.
It's really funny because like I made a note about this when I watched this again last night about how, Mulder, the night before he sees on television on his like janky television that there's like a nature documentary about animal behavior. And then all of a sudden he's quoting that as if like he's known this for like years. He's like, oh, well, they're just exhibiting pack behavior. And I'm like, this is a poor man that just got killed right in front of you. It's kind of funny.
See our episode of The Twilight Zone, because it was one of the changes that we got surprised by when we saw, and not in a bad way, when we saw our Twilight Zone episode, is originally they were watching something else in the station on in the Arctic station. They were watching something else on the laptop. They were watching an old Twilight Zone episode actually. And then when we saw it, they'd actually replaced it with a nature documentary
about sharks and stuff. Yeah,
about like preys killing. I kind of love that. That's really cool.
But there's an interesting observation to be made though too, is that this Hills Have Eyes, Texas Chainsaw Massacre-esque family, you see them very much mourning losses.
Yeah, yes,
very much mourning. In fact, it's kind of where the episode basically sort of starts. And But Mulder and Scully are just like, they're cold. They just don't. They're
stone cold. And actually, something I genuinely don't remember, and I don't know if you do. Do they just always like kill the bad guy at the end and like they have a huge body count? Do I like not remember the fact that?
No, I don't. They don't usually have a giant. They don't usually have a huge body count. They don't always like. I feel like most of the time, they don't really figure out what it is either, or like solve it. It's always like. So this definitely was more violent, I guess, gory.
They never solve their mysteries. They always just leave it open and they're just like, I don't know what happened here, Scully. And Scully's like, it was some form of psychosis.
Well, the truth is out there. That's how
truth is out there.
We'll eventually get to it. So I do have a question kind of going back to your childhood. Do you guys remember the sort of like furor about this coming on television because of like the TVM rating and everything? Did that ever like pop into your head when you were a kid?
I don't remember. I know that it was a thing, and I can't remember if the situation was that they couldn't rerun it at the end of the season, or they couldn't show it at all. I can't remember, because I thought it was that they could show it originally.
Yeah.
And then it was like couldn't rerun it, and then it started popping up in syndication, right?
Yeah. So because I would have been 96, I would have been 15 when this came out. And so my recollection of this was that like in the 90s, I couldn't watch a whole lot of TV because I was in marching band. And so marching band, you had to practice at nights. And so you didn't have DVR, so you couldn't like record things. So like my ability to watch television was pretty minuscule. But I remember this one being like whispered about because it was like one of the first times that a show on broadcast network, because again, I didn't have cable in the 90s either, was going to be TVM. It was going to be a mature thing that they were airing on Fox on a Friday night. And so I remember all that kind of furor leading up to it and then watching it and being like, oh my gosh, it was so good. And then everyone started complaining, particularly about the dead baby at the beginning. And then they never aired it again until like 1999 is when they finally on a Halloween on Fox television were like, the one episode of X-Files that was banned, we're coming back for one night. And so they started like leaning into that marketing. But yeah, it showed up on like on effects and that kind of thing, syndication. But like, yeah, I remember that being such a big moment for network television in the 90s.
Huh. I've heard that as well, and also it's because we picked Glenn's brain to death, I think, on it when we were on Twilight Zone, and I'm not gonna put any words in his mouth, but I do remember that to him, it was like he knew the episode was really good, but it was also did not see. Am I wrong here? He didn't really. He was like, I didn't think it would be like a big deal. He knew it was just good and really. But I think he was just like, yeah, we're just trying to be kind of messed up. But X-Files was always kind of messed up. I don't remember any controversy, obviously.
Yeah.
And, the fact that it's actually like a major network show has a hidden episode is a really cool idea.
Yeah.
There's also like, there's nothing in it. And not to say, by the way, it's amazing. It's brilliant. It is shocking, but there's nothing in it content wise that you could tell someone about that is less shocking, or that is more shocking than anything you would see on like a Ryan Murphy show now. Like
no, you're absolutely right.
Whatever season of American Horror Story, and that's we've escalated as a society. Yeah, and that's interesting. Well, really interesting.
Yeah. This episode. Okay, so my parents grew up. Well, I grew up with my parents watching the X-Files. Like every Friday night, we would be in bed so they could watch X-Files, and I remember hearing the theme song coming down the hallway from our house was pretty small, so I could hear it in my bedroom, and like I would sneak out and try to watch it and then get the shit scared out of me, whatever was happening. And this was the episode that my parents always talked about as like the pinnacle of X-Files, like why X-Files is amazing, like the best thing ever. And so I heard about it like multiple times from my family, and I was finally old enough to watch it. And I definitely was not. I was like 10, like definitely not old enough, but I watched it and was so uncomfortable the entire time. I watched it last night and I was like, I did not understand what was happening, but my stepdad always, this is terrible. He would make jokes about the woman on the cart, the mom. And it wasn't funny, but I didn't understand it. And then she got pulled out from under the bed on the show. And I was like, I can't do this. Like, this is just entirely too much. And I couldn't process what was happening. And my stepdad's like, did you know what just happened? I was like, And then he explained it to me, which is somehow worse, having your stepdad explain that episode to you. But that was fun. But the one part I really remember, this is a very weirdly specific moment, is when he sucks the gasoline out of the can to put into the car. And I thought, for some reason, that really freaked me out, the idea of drinking gasoline. And that scene stuck with me. And I hadn't remembered it until I watched it last night. And I watched it. I was like, that was the scariest moment to me, was him drinking gasoline.
I want to back you up on that, because the idea of siphoning gasoline using your mouth is something that, if you've never been introduced to it before, it is a shocking idea, even though like we've kind of had that idea in the consciousness forever. But if you've never been introduced to it, that is just like the idea of, you just spit it out. Like, oh man, it's like toxic. It's so toxic. Right?
Well, and like,
just remembered, by the way, that was the other movie that my cousin Adam introduced me to, The Toxic Avenger. That was it. Okay.
Oh, geez.
Oh boy. But yeah, just like that image of the guy with like the gross teeth, just like enveloping the. No, thank you. But then, like we said, I watched it this time and I felt sad for them, which was a very weird moment, like feeling to have. I was like, why do I feel upset? Like, this is a very weird feeling. But you do, like you said, you do see Scully and Mulder as not necessarily as heroic as I think you would initially think. Because remember, they're like, oh, well, this probably isn't the X, like for the FBI or X-Files. And like, oh, well, they might have kidnapped someone. Like, oh, yep, now we have probable cause.
It ripped.
What?
Okay. I mean, I think maybe it does raise some really interesting ethical questions, because, correct me if I'm wrong, they were there because they found the remains of the baby, which is a very disturbing image and all of that. But we see them mourning, the family mourning. You just don't understand where the baby came from. You find out that's how Mulder and Scully basically ended up there. Yeah, was to investigate that. You find out that, as disturbing as it all is, this is a fully consensual, functioning family unit that Mulder and Scully have gone in on and found every reason to, well, we know, murder. To murder. Yeah. However, they didn't know they don't know they're kicking the hornet's nest and sending them out into town to go kill, which at that point they are criminals. But before that point, should Mulder and Scully be there? No, I do believe, and I have no idea, and I don't even feel comfortable saying this with a microphone, but I think it's illegal, no matter what. So, and it probably should be. But the concept of the fact that they were all like apparently keeping to themselves, which was a whole thing, right? Remember, they said that so many times. It's like, we just let them do their thing because we don't want things to change around here, which is a big theme of the whole idea is like, we like our little small town, and anything that happens shakes it up, and we don't want to shake it up. And I do find it really interesting having Mulder and Scully come in. I mean, having them be interlopers is definitely a huge theme of the X-Files, but having them like all potential for like investigating a really heinous thing that's going on
is also somehow a potential trigger to blow up the myth of the American dream that everyone else has.
Right.
It's very interesting. I want to just like applaud Glenn, and I apologize, I cannot remember his co-writer for
James Wan.
Thank you, James Wan.
Yeah, the thing that this watching this last night brought back a lot of memories for, because and I've mentioned this briefly on the podcast before, but when I was in high school, I was a junior in high school. Someone that I went to school with was I went to school in Bellevue, Nebraska, and it's this kind of small town. It's like 40,000 people, so it's not anywhere near as like small as like home is in this episode, but like it's kind of kept the small town vibe, even though it does have 40,000 people living in it. And there was a kid when I was a junior in high school that was brutally murdered, ritualistically murdered, stabbed with knives, like brutal murder. No. And the way the town reacted to that, this episode brought back so many memories of being a kid, and kids in school wouldn't want to talk about it. It was like hushed whisperings. People that when reporters would ask about it, no one in the town wanted to talk to outsiders because they wanted to maintain their sort of like, we're just a small town. We're not like the other towns. There's nothing bad that ever happens here in the heartland of America. It's this. And so like seeing the way that the sheriff kind of like, I've seen all these horrible things that happen outside of my home, and I just don't want my home to change. It reminded me so much of this episode, and sort of like that kind of small town fear in the 90s of like trying to keep that kind of American innocence you had mentioned before of like the 1950s still alive. It kind of made me feel weird last night.
Yeah. Well, the idea is it's super clear, and it was clear in 1996 when they put it out, which is so funny because it feels like a new problem, right? Which is like, yeah. Hey, this giant glistening facade of the amazing American white picket fence, mm-hmm. It actually has a festering cancer in it. And as long as you don't poke that festering cancer, everything's okay, right? But you have to, because it's the right thing to do. Mm-hmm. And that's, that apparently was true in 1996. And by the way, they did not stumble into that. That is on purpose. Like this is not us ascribing modern ideas to an older episode of the X-Files. They were exactly what we're talking about. I mean, it's in the Wikipedia. They say this is what we're trying to do. Yeah.
Right. Well, and it kind of, I mean, you can kind of see what I think is so kind of brave and exciting about this episode is that X-Files is kind of at their height at this time. It's like there millions of people are watching this. It is a mainstream program, and they have written an episode that takes homages to like The Hills Have Eyes and to the Texas Chainsaw Massacre, and the themes introduced and discussed in those 1970s films are being like repackaged for a television episode for at that time modern audiences. And it's the same kind of themes being explored, that sort of rottenness in the heartland, rottenness in like the small town home, rottenness in America that no one wants to talk about.
Mm. Yeah, and it's interesting. And even when we look at it from a 2021 perspective, we still see the same themes from literally the 1970s. Yeah, yeah. I actually wanted to bring up something because I don't have an answer to it, but the name Home feels really well picked, even though the title doesn't play. I mean, you're just watching the X-Files. Nobody really pays attention to the title, but there's a lot of different like ways to interpret it, because home, there's the whole idea of like, oh, home is what you make of it. So this is as Justin was just saying, like these people were actually seemingly relatively happy with their extraordinarily disturbing existence. That was their home, and we have people coming in and invading. Actually, there's several versions of home invasions in the movie, right? Like, yeah. We have the invasion of the chief of police, and then Mulder and Scully are the home invaders. And is there another one?
Well, then they're in the home being invaded by the people that used to live in the home, because now they're in the home and trying to keep the brothers out of the home. Yeah, so there's like multiple different ways of seeing that.
Hang on, I'm sorry. Is the town called Home? Am I forgetting that?
No, it is. Yeah.
Yeah, the town is called Home. Yeah.
Okay, sorry, but I'm ignoring that. But saying that wasn't an accident, of course. So. And also, by the way, in terms of thematically, it also connects to William Faulkner's A Rose for Emily, which I don't know if you guys had to read that.
Oh yeah.
In any of your journeys, but basically about a short story about a woman in the South who
just after the Civil War, right? And people are coming, Reconstruction people are coming down, and she hooks up. She's been lonely. She hooks up one of the guys that comes down from the north to work in the town. Guy disappears. Years go by, and they're like, "Oh, she was happy for a little while. We hadn't seen her in years." And then one day when she finally passes away, it turns out that she's been sleeping with his dead body.
Oh my God! Holy shit!
And the whole thing is this. The whole thing is this. Metaphor about preserving the South and the relationship between the North and the South and all this stuff. But yeah, that's William Faulkner. Yeah.
Wow.
I read that in high school. Like that was like a high school requirement.
So interesting. I would love to have Glenn is like such a character, and he's like one of my favorite people in the whole world. But he is the wryest person I think I know, and I want to hear him talk about Faulkner in relation to Holmes so bad. You just open a whole can of worms I didn't know. That's great.
There's some similarities there.
That's cool. That's great.
Wow, that's really weird. Now that I think about it,
can I shout out something very particular in this episode that I just like? Okay, so zooming out for a second. We are obviously in, or at least at the end of, or somewhere we are in a golden age of TV, right now. Back then, TV was kind of considered a lesser art form, I suppose. Mm-hmm. Is that fair to say?
Yeah. It's like you like
cinema.
Like back then, I think if you were Steven Spielberg in the 90s, you would never go to TV.
Yeah, you would never do that. Yeah. And so a lot of the time it was like, you're shooting. It's season 4, episode 2. You've done it a billion times. We're setting up the dolly track here. We're shooting this close up there. This is how the X-Files looks. There's not a whole lot of like things being tried. And I don't mean the X-Files. I just mean in general.
In general,
like, TV, you just need to make your day and get enough close-ups so you can cut a thing together, that has the character work. The lighting in that episode rules. It is so cool. It is not easy to do really fascinating lighting in a TV schedule. And also, by the way, not just a TV schedule, but it has so much darkness in it. And people, because you don't know how the TV set is set, like normally the network is telling you, like, do not shoot something really dark, because if their TV set isn't set right, then they don't see anything and we get weird phone calls, And nobody knew how to calibrate a TV set in 1996. People barely know today. And so they have this opening that has these wild flashes of light with that from all different directions, which is a very expensive look. And then also flashing in these huge fields. It's very hard to do. And light and and rain and all of that. So this scene actually looks absolutely amazing. But really, I want to call out when we first allude to the mother.
Oh my God.
And it's just the scene inside the house ends, and the camera wanders off into total darkness, and then continues, and you see something there kind of going, and then it just keeps moving in, and you just see 2 eyes, and it takes forever to reveal it, and you are just showing 2 eyes. And I don't know if people like Fox gave them phone calls saying like, "Hey, I can't see anything," and they fought against it or whatever. But that shot must have been. There's a lot of balls involved in that shot. Truly there are. Like you see it and it's like, of course, it's amazing. It's the best shot in the whole episode. But for what the demands of TV are and were, where they're even heightened then, where it's like, we don't have HD TVs, people, the colors are crushed all over the place. The blacks were super black, high contrast. And they just introduced a whole character by just going to black and then just showing just their eyes on a network TV show. And I think that's crazy. So
it's so hard for me to remember too, like watching this, because I've watched so much of it on demand because I was still really young when it first came out. So like watching it now on like Netflix or Hulu, it's like, oh, this was on like TV. Like these people watch this with commercial breaks like every week. So it's like, oh yeah, that's like creepy television we have today, but realizing how groundbreaking it was in 96 as opposed to what we see, like you said now, I think Justin, with like American Horror Story and how we just kind of, we don't care as much about the horror-y stuff on screen.
It kind of surprised me a bit with that particular shot, how cinematic this episode felt in a way that, I mean, I'm not a really big, I don't know a lot of X-Files. I mean, I think I saw like maybe the first 2 seasons, and then I got again with my band and everything. I was like, every night I was doing something, so I couldn't keep up with television, so I didn't watch television. But like this seemed really, really cinematic. And that shot in particular jumped out at me. And then the shot when the sheriff and his wife are murdered, and it's the pan outside of the house, like
outside the house.
Yeah. And it's like just pulling out and going back down to the car. And I'm like, wow, that is a really well constructed for broadcast television in the 90s. That is a really good shot that you would see now a lot more in television. But like, I don't remember being as like surprised at shots in the 90s with television, because it is on such a tight schedule.
Yeah.
It's wild.
Sure. And I mean, we haven't asked Glenn about this. We would assume a lot of the reasons why it is so cinematic is because, well, even though he is not the director of that episode, he's one of the writers of the episode, and he is someone who works in cinema. Yeah. So it's like, oh yeah, it's mine. Probably thinks that way. I mean, he never had to do this, but I know like when it's weird when you're working in TV, it's not weird, but in TV, the writer is your boss, which the dynamics are different in other places. But luckily he never had to like come down to us and be like, could you be cinematic, please? Yeah.
Actually, this is just me going from the Wikipedia, not from the horse's mouth, but I think him and James Wong had left the X-Files briefly, and then to go and work on another show that I watched. I cannot remember what it's called, like Space Station or something like that. And I actually really liked the show, but I can't remember his name. But then I think this episode, for whatever reason, was kind of like his comeback. Their comeback, right? Mm-hmm. I don't know anything about the first episode of that season, so forgive me if that's totally wrong. But I bet that's another reason. I'll bet they kind of like were able to negotiate to be like, hey, we really got to kind of do this. It can't just be the close-ups and the wide, and it feels cool. That way. So.
Well, and the thing that I realized last night was that because again, I'm not as big of an X-Files, like I don't know as much about it, but the two episodes that stick out in my mind were this episode and then the episode from, I think it was maybe season 1 or season 2 called Ice. And that was also written by the two of them.
What can you give me?
That's the one about like they're in Alaska resort, like a remote part of Alaska, and there's like a parasite that is infecting people and turning them against each other. Those are literally the two episodes of the X-Files that I remember, and I was like, oh, that makes sense. They're both written by the same people.
You want to know something funny?
You need to watch more X-Files, though.
I think it's like the third episode of season 1 or something, but it's called Stretch. The guy who can like stretch his body. I have no joke.
Toombs?
Yes, Toombs. Yes. Oh my God. Yeah. Toomey. Either way.
Toombs. Yeah. That motherfucker haunted my childhood.
I'm not kidding you. I have read the novelization of that episode. Like I was really into that episode. Like that.
Okay, and also he's from Baltimore, and I was born in Baltimore, so I'm always like, he's here. Like I still live kind of near Baltimore, and I'm like, he's here. He's coming for me. I watched that episode once when I was babysitting in front of a fireplace, and I was like, a fucking hand is going to come down the fireplace, and Toombs is going to encase me in his nasty little like bio cocoons.
Oh, I kind of do remember that now that you're talking about it. I kind of remember that episode.
There was 2 episodes with him. He could stretch into like all the little crevices and stuff, and he could kill people, and they couldn't figure out who it was because they didn't realize he was coming in through the vents.
The shot you'd remember, I think, is probably it's just a close-up of the vent, and you watch the screws get unscrewed from the inside of the vent. And it's just very scary to watch.
It's very scary. There's also a shot of him just like at the end of an event, but his arm is stretching, but it looks like nothing. But then you realize his arm is stretched out way further than any normal arm.
Yes,
it should be stretched.
We've made Justin and I have made a commercial for an Olympus camera, I think. Yeah, and it had a man with a super long arm. We talked about the Twilight Zone stretch. I
just want to say one last thing about home.
Yeah, please do.
No, please.
One last thing. I love the amount of time in that episode spent of Mulder and Scully expressing the science behind the death of the Peacock family, I guess is a good way to put it. Genuinely, I'm not saying it sarcastically. I love it when movies and TV shows do that. I don't even use the word exposition for that. I just think like, if it's not dragging, it's just super interesting. Mm-hmm. And we find ourselves all the time having to remove things like that from things we've done to speed things up a little bit. But I just love it that like there's, again, Midnight's network TV show. They're like, nope, we're going to give a whole scientific explanation for everything in this lab. And it's just so interesting. And it's so interesting. You can almost feel like the excitement of the actors expressing it.
Yeah.
It is. Oh my God. I actually I just remembered another moment I want to just talk about. I don't even know in what way, but it's just kind of, it's one expression of emotion where it's the first time they ever go to the Peacock's door. And they can see in through the screen door and they go, hello, and nobody answers. And so I believe one of them reaches for the door and the other one
wants to go in.
And he goes, no. He goes, hang on, probable cause. And then they look around and they just see like a pair of scissors. And I think it might be covered in a bunch of blood.
It is, but you don't see that right away. You just see like a pair of scissors.
And it's this expression of emotion. They just look at each other and they just sigh. And then they pull out their guns.
Yes. So it's like where she gave birth to the baby, but they're like, that must be like that. They're just like, they have this flashlight and like, there it is. And exactly. They just like exchanged like knowing looks and walk in with their guns. It's like, okay. Like how often do you see this? Just.
And I don't even know how to like parse it because it still feels really on brand for them in the show and all of that. But also like, I remember when I was rewatching it, I still didn't see the blood until they cut until the 2 or 3 cuts later, you know? And I was like, they just saw some scissors and then they like sigh and they're like, here we go again.
Don't leave scissors out. People are going to just break in your house thinking you're doing some ill things. Yeah, that was my first thought too, because I did not see the blood. I just saw a pair of scissors and I'm like, that's all it takes.
About that, and I'm glad that you called out that you couldn't see the blood because I couldn't either, but I thought I was crazy. I'll bet everyone had that problem because the whole thing that I was just saying was like this episode is ballsy with its lighting.
It's very dark,
you know, and that's a casualty of it, of course, even on a modern TV. So I just realized one last thing that should be mentioned about this episode. It ends on the opportunity for the story to keep going. Yes, and it hasn't yet.
No.
But if someone out there, didn't they make a sequel? Well, also, there's a season 11 of the X-Files where like sort of the theme of the show is the truth is still out there, but like no one cares. And because it was years ago. That's so genius. I would have loved to have seen the continuation of this episode in the season 11 that very few people have seen. Yeah. Season 10 was really publicized, but 11 was like this thing you didn't hear about a whole lot. And there was some interesting stuff.
Yeah.
That's it.
Oh my God. What if they like the next X-Files movie is a continuation of film? Yes. That's the next one.
They're all amazing.
So-
I mean, this has become like one of the most beloved episodes of it. Like everyone talks about this episode. It seems prime to make something more with it, I would think.
Well, and like the new Wrong Turn movie is coming out. Everyone loves Texas Chainsaw Massacre. People like to see these awful representations of rural communities. Unfortunately, it would probably play really well.
In
or not. I don't know.
I mean, in some ways, it's like a really gross version of Badlands.
On that note, do we want to give it a rating out of 5?
Sounds good.
Okay. So, Terry, how many carts for mom out of 5 do you give home the episode in the X-Files?
Oh God. I have to give poor mom. I'm sorry. That scene still like that is the one scene I remembered from this show. Just even gosh, we're going on I think 25 years this October. It will be 25 years since this episode came out. And that is the scene that sticks in my mind the entire time is when mom is wheeled out from under the bed. Which from what I understand from Wikipedia, actually was pulled from a Charlie Chaplin autobiography of him like going to some house and they wheeled out some quadriplegic from under the bed and he did dances. It's so surreal and hyper real and so weird. I have to give it 5 carts for moms out of 5. I think this episode is fantastic. I think it's aged really well, particularly in terms of like the way it's shot and the way the music is portrayed in it. I think it's a fantastic episode of the season. And it's the first time that I realized that the home plate is actually shaped like a house. Is that true? Or do they just like, because like they throw it down and it is in a house shape, and I'm like, I've never really realized it before.
Because home plate usually is like not wood and it's like rounded. It's a little bit more rounded. I never thought about it looking like a home, but
because that was the first thing that came in my mind is like, oh, because I'm not sports. I don't know anything about sports. And I was like, wow, that looks like a freaking house. I'm like, is that why it's called home plate? That was my thought last night watching this.
It might be. You blew my fucking bean, man.
I just had ego death. You got me completely.
I was like, I was afraid of bringing this up because I was like, is that like everyone's gonna be like, yeah, Terry, that's why it's called home plate? Because I don't know anything about sports. I'm a fat gay man. What do I know about anything like that? But and anyway, so yeah, five carts from Mom out of 5. I love this episode. I think it's fantastic. I watched it twice for this episode because I just really enjoyed it. What about you, Mary Beth?
Well, okay, I'm going to be fully honest, and I did not rewatch the episode fully sober, so it scared me even more because I was like, what the fuck is this? It'll be more terrifying than I could have ever remembered. So I'm giving it a 5 out of just how scarred it made me. The scenes that I saw were like, those have just lived in my mind like my entire life, and I didn't know where they came from. And how it takes these tropes that you've seen a lot in kind of rural horror and makes them feel unique at the same time, which is, I think, difficult, but also really amazing to see. And also it's a TV show. Like, this is a television show that did this, and it's absolutely amazing. So Justin and Aaron, you have the final word. What is your rating out of how many carts out of 5? Carts for Mom out of 5. I
was going to give it a 5 out of 5 carts. And then I remembered this thing that happened between Aaron and I and Glenn Morgan, one of the writers of the episode. And it was this: Aaron and I were on a plane going to go direct an episode of The Twilight Zone he wrote. And we were talking about who would be like the perfect for casting of this one role in the episode. And we were like thinking of names of like really tatted up musicians and rock stars. And the plane landed, and we get this text from him basically saying, Glenn has cast Tim Armstrong from Rancid and Operation Ivy in your episode as that character. And just the simple fact that happened, I have to give him 10 carts out of 5.
There you go.
he gets 10,000%. By the way, it's already a brilliant episode, but he's so cool. And that he must get more.
Mm-hmm. I actually give him 10 carts and 2 bloody pig's heads on the door.
Oh,
yeah.
Sweet.
Mm-hmm.
Amazing. Good. I'm glad that we all lots of carts for Mom out of this episode. Oh God.
She'll never run out. Well, thank you guys so much for joining us to talk about the X-Files episode Home. Where can our listeners find you, and what do you have coming up you'd like to share, or that you're able to share?
It's funny. We got a bunch of stuff coming up, and we're not supposed to talk about any of it.
Yeah. Synchronic is coming out on January 12th.
Yes.
On January 12th on VOD, and 2 weeks later on Blu-ray in the United States, and a lot of other places around the world are getting it very shortly. I think that most major markets have a release date at this point, which is great.
Cool.
Awesome.
And do you have a Twitter? Can anyone follow you on Twitter?
Yes, it's our names. That's probably the easiest way, but at Aaron Moorhead.
Cool.
Benson, yeah.
And we'll have those in the show notes too, if anyone needs to look at them.
Oh, sorry, what was that?
I was saying we'll put your handles in the show notes so people can look at them if they need to grab them. Cool. So everyone, all listeners out there, you've heard from us. We want to hear from you. What was your experience with the X-Files episode Home? You can send us an email at scarredforlifepodcast@gmail.com, or you can reach out to us directly on Twitter. I am at MB McAndrews.
And I'm at Gaily Dreadful.
And of course, don't forget to follow the podcast on Twitter at Scarred Podcast.
And please don't forget to review, rate, and subscribe.
Thank you to Eric Power for our artwork. Thank you to Sean Keller for our music. Thank you, everyone out there, for listening. Stay safe out there, but most importantly, stay creepy.
And until next time.
Won't somebody please think of the children? Somebody please think of the children. Oh.
Acast powers the world's best podcasts. Here's a show that we recommend.
What is the briefing room?
It's a behind-the-scenes look at how the criminal justice system works and the lives of the people within that system.
If you love true crime, well, these are the real people who do the job every day of making sure justice is served.
Hi, I'm Detective Dave.
I'm Detective Dan. Together, we have decades of experience in local law enforcement, a profession that we think is often misunderstood.
So we're going to explore how to do it right, and we won't shy away from when it's done wrong. These are stories you'll hear nowhere else. Unique, frank, and unvarnished.
From the team that brought you Small Town Dicks, this is The Briefing Room. Episode 1 drops on August 30th. We'll meet you in the briefing room.
Acast helps creators launch, grow, and monetize their podcasts everywhere. Acast.com.